I think we're ready to, let's shift to Europe. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative actually ends in Greece and Italy, where the Chinese have signed big deals in very poor parts of those countries. So and of course, they're exerting power over, trying to exert real power over countries in Europe to get them to accept the Huawei telecommunications system. I was so surprised recently to see or to read that the Chinese ambassador to Germany threatened that there would be consequences if the Germans kept Huawei out of their system. So, but give us your overview of what's happening between China and Europe.
Well, I think you just set the tone well, that the European Union in the last couple of years has evolved a much more defined and more assertive approach in its relations to China. Now, EU-China relations go back many decades, and there have been many strategies, and there's a very deep texture of engagement across various sectors. But there was a step change just in March of last year, when the European Commission, which is, if you like, it's not a secretariat, but it's the kind of legislative arm of the European Union at one level, came up with a communication to the heads of government, which essentially set out 10 actions for the future. Now, this wasn't deliberately to be numerological like China is with, the 10 whatevers, and we just call these 10 actions. And they were a mixture of proposals for partnership and calls on the Chinese. For example, a wish for China to work more closely with the EU on what we mean by multilateralism, also on human rights, for example, on things like emissions, that China should meet the Paris Agreement standards, to work on the question of Iran, which of course has been a problem with the US, as you know, on things like WTO reform, and on trade matters, questions such as level playing field, reciprocity, and market access. And on the two issues I think of interest to your discussion today, the EU decided it would work on a common EU approach to 5G, and also it would look at investment screening. Now, some areas of EU activity are entirely EU collective competences like trade. Other areas like 5G and network security are not. So it's a mix of the member states working together, always close cooperation with the European Commission, but some areas are actually legally the preserve of the Commission. So the heads of the European Union approved this communication in March, and just a few weeks later unveiled this new approach at a summit with China, an EU-China summit in April 2019. And I think it's fair to say that the Chinese side were quite surprised that the EU were now adopting a granular, a fairly assertive, and a kind of objective-oriented approach. And there were three other aspects which that communication emphasized, which are now part of the European Union approach. First, that the European Union wanted to be a cooperative and negotiating partner, saw China rather as a cooperative or a cooperating and negotiating partner. Second, that it saw China as an economic competitor, including in the area of technology. And third, and this is probably the most significant element, that it saw China as a systemic rival, promoting alternative models of governance. That has been the basic approach of the European Union then. It continues to be the approach now. This is not about decoupling or leaving the field. It's about engagement, but with a much more defined and much sharper set of objectives. Also, objectives that the EU side would like the Chinese to step up to in follow-up to these summit meetings, as well as the European Union at the same time regulate uninvited screening. And that will actually come into effect in November of this year. There was an 18-month transition period. And that is also, I think, relevant in terms of what we've just been talking about, in terms of areas such as technology and 5G. And the other aspect which has changed the climate this year has been COVID, of course, because COVID, in a sense, has acted as a kind of an accelerator of this existing geopolitical trends. There were differing narratives between China and the European Union about COVID and, who discovered things first, who was helping whom, etc. And it's not just on 5G, there are also healthcare dimensions. And I should just say that there were also concerns about non-Chinese efforts to purchase companies doing...
American efforts, yes.
Yes, exactly. The CureVac, the vaccine company. Right. So this, I think, generally has led to a greater sense of the European Union having to chart a path. Obviously, you mentioned the US and the European Union have always had a close, well, for most of the time have had a close transatlantic relationship. Perhaps after November, they'll again have a close transatlantic relationship, but we'll see. But I think that I just wanted to set that out just to give you a sense of the sort of the flavor of what has been happening. So the EU will continue to have its summits with China. There'll be a virtual summit in early September with President Xi Jinping. There was a virtual high-level meeting as well in July involving Li Keqiang and Xi Jinping. And just a few weeks ago, there was a high-level economic dialogue involving Liu He and his team and the Vice President Dombrovskis of the Commission on trade issues, where there are a number of very knotty problems, market access, level playing field, these kinds of things. In terms of 5G, as I said, it is not legally closed community competence. So what the European Union have evolved is a toolbox, which would involve these high-level statements of position, also draw together existing regulatory frameworks like the EU Cyber Security Act of last year, trade defense instruments, the General Data Protection Regulation with which you'd be familiar, and various other directives, and essentially draw these together. And these would be kind of norms or standards around which EU member states would congregate as we move forward in this. Now, EU member states, as you yourself have said, are not totally in every single aspect precisely on the same page, but there's a certain degree of progress on this. And I think the other thing I would say, Bill, is that generally, not just in Europe, but I'm sure around the world, a lot of people are waiting to see precisely what happens in the US in November. I think that's also a feature generally, that's not specific to any one country. So that's I hope I've not gone on too long, but that's a broad just snapshot of where things are and how the EU is looking at things.
So how widespread out of the total EU, how many countries have embraced Huawei technology in one way or the other?
I think it obviously depends on the degree to which it's been done. I think at one stage, nearly every EU member state, you go back 10, 15 years, was courting Huawei to invest in their countries. I think most famously, I think the UK, who are no longer a member of the European Union. So I think that the issue is in a certain amount of flux at the moment. It's not for me to speak on behalf of any other country, but I notice, for example, that Germany has yet to come to decisions in this. There's an expectation there may be decisions around September. There are issues about...
We've been joined by Patricia Kranz, or...
There are issues about... Beg your pardon?
We've just been joined by Patricia Kranz, the Executive Director of the OPC. Good morning, Patty. Ambassador Kelleher is in the middle of a fascinating discussion about Europe. Continue.
Hi, Patricia. Hi, Patricia. But I'll very quickly come to an end. I mean, core versus non-core aspects of 5G technology, the question of diversifying supply chains. And again, I go back to the issue of the autonomy of the European Union. The European Union will take EU decisions. It won't necessarily simply cut and paste decisions that are taken elsewhere.